Especially if you are a visitor, please stay and fellowship with us. As you might know, this is my first Sunday here as the new minister, officially at least. And so if you're a visitor, I might mistake you for a long-time member. But please stay. There will be plenty of food, and I'm told everyone here is a great cook. But please stay with us. You might notice on the bulletin there's some sermon notes. Please don't look at the questions yet. If you have, it's fine. But these are questions for reflection after the sermon. And I encourage you, in the next few weeks, beginning the next few weeks, we're going to start looking at vision setting and mission planning, making a vision and mission statement for our congregation. And these are questions aimed at getting our mind rolling. So I encourage you to keep this, fill it out, look at that after service, and begin thinking through those things. But it's so wonderful to be here today. It's so great to finally be here worshiping with y'all. I'm excited for the great things God is going to do here at Cross Timbers. As you know, I was here with y'all last week just worshiping, mostly because of the busyness of the move. As I'm sure most of you have experienced before, moving is not very fun. I think, and I probably don't have much room to talk. This is my first time moving all my stuff to one location, so I really don't have much room to talk. I think Andrea and Danelle were having a competition last week of who moved the most. Was it 28 times or so? Did anyone beat that? 28 times? Is that our record for the congregation? But anyways, most of us have experienced the pains of moving. And moving is difficult not only because of the work involved in moving itself, but because it literally takes us out of our comfort zones. We're called to pick up our lives, take what belongings we can, and move to a new unknown place. It's difficult. It's not fun. You have to take what possessions you can and travel to this new land. Now, we might list off reasons we're called to go to this new place, maybe jobs, family, school. But beyond these earthly reasons, we believe in a God who is intimately involved in the world we live in, and a God who calls and guides people for His own purposes. And this morning, the Bible is full of what I call stories of God calling individuals, peoples, even nations to go to fulfill His mission in a new land that He wants to place them in, to fulfill His work there. We can think of Moses, who was once master over the people of Israel in Egypt, called to lead them out of Egypt. That had to be kind of awkward. We can think of the people of Israel, who lived 430 years in the land of Egypt, told to go to this promised land that none of them have ever been to before, that none of them have ever even been out of Egypt. You may think of David, you might say the runt of the litter, called to be king over the people of Israel. Maybe think of Esther, an exile in a foreign land, called to confront the king of Persia to save God's people. Or think of Jonah, called to go preach to a city that he does not even want to go to. He doesn't even care to save this foreign city. But he's called to go preach this good news to them, preach repentance to them, to give them a chance. We can jump to the New Testament, think of the apostles called to follow this new teacher, Jesus, who they do not yet know, and have to leave their job and family at the drop of a hat to go answer God's mission. Or we can think of the apostle Paul, who's once persecuted Christians, called to go travel all over the Roman world, city to city, and spend years traveling, proclaiming the message he once killed people for. So the call narrative, the call story is one of the major themes, one of the major motifs in the biblical narrative. And this morning I want us to look at one particular call story that I think holds a special message for us. The story is the call of Abraham, found in Genesis 12. If you want to follow along. Now, one of the key themes to reading the Bible well is to read in context. But the odd thing about the story we're going to look at this morning is, other than a brief mention in Genesis 11 and a genealogy, we know nothing about Abraham, or Abram at this point. Forgive me, throughout the sermon I will probably interchange those two names. But we know nothing about Abram at this point. Perhaps more important and more striking, though, is Abraham knows nothing about God at this point. Now, it's easy for us as Christians today to think, God called Abraham. Of course he must go. But Abraham doesn't even know who the God of the Bible is at this point. He's never interacted with Yahweh God. He has no idea who God the Lord is. This is Abraham's first encounter with God. When Abram lived in the city of Ur, which he's about to be called out of, Abraham and his family would have likely worshipped the ancestral gods or the local gods of the city of Ur. And Jewish tradition actually has just such a story about Abraham worshiping these false idols. But this is Abraham's first encounter with God. It's abrupt, it's unexpected, it comes out of nowhere. So let's look at our passage this morning. Genesis 12, beginning in verse 1. Give ear to the word of God. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abraham went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all the possessions which they had accumulated, and all the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And thus they came to the land of Canaan, and Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So as you said, the call of Abraham is abrupt. This is Abraham's first encounter with this new God. He's never interacted with him before. And God doesn't even introduce himself. His first word is, "Go to this land I'm going to show you." No, if I were Abraham, I'd be kind of shocked at this point. I'd be like, "Hi, who are you? Why should I go?" Abraham's never interacted with God before. This call comes out of nowhere. But not only is it unexpected, but I think it's easy for us to miss how challenging the call is. Look at verse 1 again. God gives Abram 3 commands. He says, "Go forth from your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house." Now, in the modern world, as modern readers, this may not strike us that much, but these are major things God is asking, each with increasing significance. The first one, go forth from your country. Now, this is not like moving states or locations for us today. In the ancient world, where you lived tended to determine which gods you worshipped. It was thought that gods ruled over different regions. So if you lived in Egypt, you worshiped the Egyptian gods. If you lived in Greece, you worshiped the Greek gods. So when God says, ask Abraham, leave your country, he's not merely asking him to leave his homeland. He's telling him to abandon the worship of your past gods and worship me alone. So this is a major thing God is asking. And we go on, God becomes more specific. He says, leave your relatives. Now again, in our modern world, we don't typically understand this. Usually, leave your relatives doesn't mean all that much to the modern family. We may keep connections with the nuclear family, maybe grandparents and aunts and uncles. But that's about it. But in the ancient world, family was everything. Family was the central unit of life. Family is everything. And so when God's calling Abraham to abandon his family, he's saying, abandon all natural roots, abandon your ancestors. This is a major thing God is asking. And then the final one, the most powerful. The final command is the strongest, asking Abraham to leave his father's house. Asking his son to leave his father's house. Now again, I think in the modern world, we don't really catch this. Usually by the time your child is a high schooler, you as a parent, some part of you as a parent, can't wait for them to get out. Junior high. As an example, I moved up here 2 weeks ago, and this is the first time I've finally moved all my belongings out of my parents' house. I moved up here 2 Wednesdays ago, and by Friday they had my room repainted. So again, we don't understand, I don't think we understand this, what a major thing God is asking here. Calling his son to leave his father's house. This was to do a dishonorable act. This was to dishonor your family. This was to give up your inheritance. This is to give up your future security. And so for Abraham to obey these 3 commands from God meant that he's putting his entire trust, his entire future, his entire security in the promise God is making to him. And if we go on, the promise really isn't all that much to go on. Look at the promise. He says, go from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to a land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. There's not a lot of details here, actually. Notice that the land of Canaan is not even mentioned. Abraham's just told to go to this unspecified land I'm going to show you. He's not even told if it's a good land. If I were Abraham and hearing from this new God for the first time, hearing this promise from this God I have no history with, I think I might ask, okay, you say I should go to this land. Is it a good land? Is it good for farming, livestock? Can you tell me anything about the land? Because moving to East Texas or West Texas are very different things. But not a lot of details here for Abraham to go on. And God really doesn't help Abraham out that much. He just says, go to this place, I'm going to show you, and I will bless you. Now, if you've known a person for a few years, and they say, give me $100, and I'll make you a fortune, you might be inclined to do it, if you've built trust with them. But if you meet a random stranger, no matter how rich and wealthy they look, if they say, give me $100 and I'll make you a fortune, I doubt many of us would be inclined to listen to them. And this is Abraham's first encounter with God. And in the first 20 words God speaks to him, he says, give up everything and come, go to this place, this unknown place that I'll show you. And I promise you I'll make you a great nation. Not a lot of details. But the story continues, and Abraham has no spoken response. He just responds by obedience, and he goes. Also note that Abraham is 75 years old, moving across deserts on foot or on camel, so I doubt any of us have any room to complain when it comes to moving. But Abraham takes everything he has, and he takes his family and Lot, his close relatives, and they go to the site of Shechem. Let's see if this thing works. Shechem is located in the West Bank. This is what you see in the picture is the modern-day city of Nablus. This is located at the ancient site of Shechem. You can actually see some of the ruins of the temple of Abimelech from Judges here in the forefront. Now, there actually wasn't a city when Abraham was here. There won't be a city until a few decades later in Genesis 35. But Shechem already seems to be an important religious site for the ancient Canaanites. To the Oak of Moreh that it says Abraham goes to, this seems to be a religious object for the ancient Canaanite religion. And not only is it important for its religious significance, but you see there's two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal on each side, and between those two mountains an ancient trade route passed through. This was one of the major cross-throughs in the land of Israel. So this is an important location. But beyond its religious and trade significance, it's also important because it's about the center of the land of Israel. Yep. I don't know what's happening. Can you put one more forward, Chad? So Shechem is about the center of the land of Israel. And this is significant in the ancient world. Because if you were going to give land to someone, if you're going to give a piece of property to someone, you met them at the center of the land you were going to give them, and you performed a land grant ceremony. You'd make a covenant or agreement. So God brings Abraham to the center of the land of Israel. And he says, tell Abraham, look around you, Abraham. All the land you see, I'm going to give it to you. Give it to you and your descendants. So at this point, I actually want us to jump ahead a few verses to Genesis 13, 14 through 17. And the reason we're doing this is actually a continuation of the promise God is making here. And what happens in the intervening verses is Abraham and Lot have become too prosperous for the land to sustain them both. And there's been some conflict between some of their people, and they agree to separate. Lot gets to pick first, and he gets to choose the more prosperous, bountiful land, well-watered land near the river in the valley. And Abraham is left in the land of Canaan. And he goes back to Bethel, you see here a little south. And, you know, it almost seems God just made this promise to the land, but now Abraham's lost half his people. Lot's separated, he's childless, he has no descendants. He's left with the less prosperous, bountiful land. It almost seems as if the promise God just made might be void. How is God going to bless Abraham now? He's already experienced the vision in this new land. But God appears to Abraham again here at Bethel, and he reaffirms the promise. Because you see, the promise, though we say promised land, the promise is not tied to the land itself. It's tied to the person God calls. The promise is tied to Abraham himself. And God calls Abraham to this mountain, check, I don't know why this thing isn't working, you advance it one more time. God calls Abraham to this mountain overlooking the promised land at Bethel. And he says in Genesis 13, he comes and reaffirms his promise. Let's read that together. Genesis 13, beginning in verse 14. And the Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes. Look from the place where you are standing, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and your descendants. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." So God comes to Abraham, he reaffirms his promise here, saying, though you've lost some of your people, though you are smaller in number, though you are stuck with the less bountiful, less prosperous land, my promise lies with you. My promise, you are my chosen instrument for my work here. My promise lies with you. So God reaffirms his promise, and God called Abraham to this mountain at Bethel to look out over, to survey the promised land, to look at the land God is going to give to him. But this is not merely a survey trip. God's not merely just letting Abraham look at the land. When God tells Abraham to look around, to walk about its length and breadth, what God is really asking Abraham to do is dream. Dream of the mighty works God will perform for God's people in this new land. Dream of the great things God is going to do for his people here in this new land that God has given him. Dream of the great works God is going to do and perform. God called Abraham to the mountain near Bethel, calling him to dream. Dream of what God might do. And like God's call to Abraham this morning, God has called each of us here. Each of us here from different walks of life has called us here to this particular time and place. Called us here with this particular group of people. And he calls us to overlook this promised land of Stephenville that God has guided us to. Check, could you advance the slide? And as God said to Abraham on the mountaintop, so God says to us this morning, look northward, southward, eastward, westward. Look over the good and spacious land of Stephenville, Texas that God has placed you in. And God says to us, dream. Dream of the great works God will perform through his people here at Cross Timbers. Dream of the mighty works God can do here in Stephenville, Texas. Dream of the great things God can do. Dream of where God might be calling us to serve. Dream of where God might be asking us to be the hands and feet of Christ. Dream of the great and marvelous things God will do through his people gathered at the Cross Timbers Church of Christ. Dream. And as Abraham set out to an unknown land, not knowing where he was going, but he journeyed with the promise. So we may not know what the work of God's work for us and mission for us may look like. But we journey with that same promise that God will be with us. And God will bless our efforts as we seek to answer his call to fulfill his mission here in Stephenville, Texas. And so this morning, let us answer the call of God. Let us begin this journey together, and let us dream of the great things God might do in Stephenville as together we stand and sing.